next session that we have is hearing from colleagues at MB. So we're going to hear from Erin King, Policy Director, and Sophie Murphy, who, following up from some of the points of the Minister's address, are going to talk about the review progress and future direction of the RSE scheme. So we've got 10 minutes with them. And then just before we finish up this part, before we go to afternoon tea, there's a few messages to share before we send you out the door. So could I ask Erin and Sophie to come to the stage, please? Welcome them.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Erin King, and it is a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about our 2026 policy review of the Recognised Seasonal Employer Scheme. On behalf of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, I would like to thank you for your engagement throughout this review. As the Minister said, it would not have been possible without the valuable insights that many of you have provided along the way. We have engaged with you in the Pacific, in the regions, in Wellington and online, and heard your concerns about the RSE scheme. The Government has agreed to a package of changes to ensure the scheme continues to deliver on its triple win outcomes for the Pacific, workers and industry. Sophie and I are not going to repeat all of these announcements, as hopefully we can leave a bit of time for questions, but we will go into a bit more detail about what some of the key announcements mean in practice. We're also going to touch on our ongoing work on accommodation standards, which I know is really important to you all, and talk you through the implementation timeframes for the work that we've done so far.
So the first key change we wish to discuss is the introduction of a graduated accreditation model. As the Minister said, rather than treating every employer the same, this change recognises the differences in risk and compliance history. New employers will have shorter accreditation periods, while established, lower risk employers may be eligible for up to 6 years of accreditation. Alongside this, the Government will introduce a graduated compliance framework. Currently, the primary sanction available is accreditation revocation, which in practice is too blunt of an instrument. The new framework will provide a range of proportionate responses to non-compliance, improving transparency for employers while strengthening the integrity of the scheme. While this is still under development, some of the potential actions include responses such as a reduction in cap allocation, ATR freezes, and placement on the immigration stand-down list. For the agreement to recruit process, we understand that current arrangements can be repetitive and time-consuming. The future model will replace greater emphasis on labour market testing, with most other elements shifted out. This includes the upfront assessment of cost recovery and accommodation, unless significant changes have occurred. This streamlined ATR will also have an endorsement model where MSD can agree that an employer only undergoes labour market testing once every 3 years if they have demonstrated genuine partnership. Non-endorsed employers must continue to test the domestic market each time they wish to recruit, including advertising roles and engaging in good faith with MSD. Variations of conditions will also be introduced to address the need for greater worker mobility. Seasonal industries are heavily influenced by weather, crop timing and unexpected business disruptions, and the current arrangements can make it too difficult to respond quickly when labour demand changes. To address this, workers will be able to move between accredited employers through carefully controlled variations of conditions. This will help workers to maximise potential earnings when in country, while allowing employers to make better use of available labour. Important safeguards will remain, such as worker consent and existing labour market protections. We'd like to note this is not intended to replace the joint ATRs, and that the variation of conditions settings will be designed to ensure they can only take place under these specific unexpected circumstances. On cost recovery, many stakeholders told us they wanted clearer rules that are easier to understand and administer. We will be introducing a templated cost recovery form outlining estimated costs, which will allow workers to choose repayment timing and opt into any additional upfront costs. This will support spot checking by the Labour Inspectorate and will improve transparency and certainty for all participants. In addition to this, the Government has agreed to introduce a list of recoverable costs. While this is still in development, we will continue to engage with industry during its design.
The Minister didn't announce changes to accommodation standards today, and that's because we needed more time to work through the different views in this area. But this work is still progressing at pace with decisions expected in September. We've heard about a range of problems with the current RSE accommodation settings, including that they overlap significantly with other New Zealand regulatory systems, such as building and housing and health and safety, and that this is confusing and creates duplication. We've heard that some of the standards are too prescriptive and that this doesn't account for the range of types of accommodation in RSE. On the other hand, we've heard that some of the standards are too flexible and unclear, so they're difficult to comply with and assess. And finally, we've heard that there is insufficient enforcement of the standards. To address these problems, we recently commenced targeted consultation on possible solutions. These are broad options, and it might be the case ultimately that we pick and choose from the different options. They're not sort of completely mutually exclusive. So the first option is to streamline the standards. So this would retain RSE accommodation standards while reducing duplication and better aligning them with existing New Zealand regulatory requirements. It would rely more explicitly on standards already set elsewhere, such as healthy homes, and focus on matters specific to the RSE scheme, such as furnishing and recreational space. The second option is to provide greater detail in the standards. This option would strengthen and clarify the existing standards through more detailed and measurable requirements. Rather than relying on broad concepts such as suitable or adequate, it would set clearer minimum standards across the board. For example, this could include greater specificity on occupancy levels, cooking facilities, and whether bunk beds remain acceptable for meeting requirements relating to suitable and separate beds. The third option in our paper is to replace the standards with accommodation plans. This option would remove the standards and replace them with more flexible accommodation plans. Employers would be required to prepare and maintain an accommodation plan for each accommodation arrangement, outlining the accommodation provided and how it supports worker wellbeing and meets immigration requirements. Plans could be submitted as part of employer approval or renewal processes. MB would provide a template or guidance on required content, and employers would retain flexibility to tailor plans to different accommodation types. Now, there are pros and cons to each of these options, and we know that the detail matters when it comes to accommodation standards. We can't go into all of that today, which is why we've circulated a consultation paper. Consultation closes on the 7th of August, and we would really appreciate your feedback, noting that, as the Minister said, she's looking to make decisions in September.
Finally, I'd like to go through our implementation timeframes. This package of changes announced will be implemented over the next 3 years over 4 key phases based on their complexity. Phase 1 in the first quarter of 2027 will see implementation of the ATR and cost recovery changes. Phase 2 in the last half of 2027 will see a suite of changes, including accreditation, compliance, pastoral care, variation of conditions, incidental tasks, and the complaints mechanism. Phase 3 in 2028 will see implementation of the changes relating to sick leave, although we do note that this is dependent on the passage of the Employment Leave Bill. And Phase 4 in 2029 will see implementation of the visa changes. Removal of the limited visa will take time as it has significant ICT implications and is reliant on broader transformation work underway in the immigration system. Implementation is therefore scheduled to align with the scheme going online in 2029. Throughout implementation, engagement with stakeholders will continue. The review process demonstrated the value of those partnerships, and successful implementation will depend on maintaining them. We thank you again for your engagement with the review so far, for your ongoing partnership, and for the work you do every day to help make the scheme a success. We're happy to answer any questions, and we'll be available at lunchtime tomorrow from 12:30 to 1:30 for a drop-in session. Thank you.
Thank you to you both. So the offer's open at the moment for any questions you might have now, as well as the drop-in session tomorrow. So thank you very much for all the time that you've given Do we have any questions for Erin and Sophie on what they've just shared? Matt's all ready to run. Yes, at the back. Okay. I think that, Sophie, you've got a question?
Oh, okay, my turn. If you're already RSE accredited and you're halfway through your accreditation, with the new 6-year accreditation, will that automatically roll over to the 6 years if you're an exemplary employer, or we have to go through RSE accreditation again?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure where I'm looking for that. So it is still in design and the actual syncing up will be determined at a later date. We're currently thinking that it'll be probably quite complex to do an assessment halfway through somebody's accreditation. So as you come up to your next one, that'll be your opportunity to apply for that longer duration. I see another hand back there.
Hi there. I was just wondering with the elections coming up at the end of the year, and if there is a potential change in government, how will this policy be affected? All these changes and stuff, are they going to be actually locked in to happen?
So Cabinet has made decisions. So those decisions remain and will be implemented unless there was an active decision to move in a different direction. Of course, we can't kind of presuppose what different governments may do, but Cabinet has made decisions and we are working on implementation.
Any other questions? And if you're still thinking about them, again, you've got the opportunity to catch up with Erin and Sophie tomorrow.
There's just one over the back here.
Which back? Okay.
Kia ora. Thanks very much. This question's about the setting out a fixed schedule of costs that will be deductible. As that's going to have an impact on the take-home income of workers, what will your engagement with Pacific Island countries look like, and will it involve MFAT or would you do it directly? Thank you.
I can talk to the engagement side. So that's definitely something we'd want to engage broadly on, including directly with Pacific countries.
Hi, and so I think throughout the review so far, we've been engaging very closely with MFAT and Pacific partners, country liaisons officers, worker representatives where possible, and the request for clear, transparent information on cost recovery was probably a top 3 priority, I would say, in terms of information we received. So we have been engaging and will be continuing to engage through our connections on that as we do the detailed design work. Is there a third one?
We'll take the last question.
In relation to the associated tasks that RSE workers are allowed to do, the example was forklift driving. How will the other tasks be decided, and will employers have input into that?
Yes, and welcome any feedback on that announcement in particular. I think forklift use in that machinery operation was again the number 1 item we'd heard. So if there are any others, now's the time to let us know. We've got our email address. Oh, go back. Our email address is rsepolicyreview@mv.gov.nz. We'll be loitering around today and tomorrow and attending all the sessions, and more than happy to hear feedback on what other incidental tasks should be added to those lists.
Thank you. Please give them a hand.